you haven't heard anything about this Travis Scott concert fiasco down in Houston?
No, I haven't heard anything outside of just basically that, what you messaged me about earlier. So yeah, I have no frame of reference. So
All
walk me
right.
through it, and I'll learn along with the audience.
Oof. All right.
Haven't heard.
This is a doozy. I haven't, prepared like a
Right.
sheaf or anything, but okay, so I guess it makes sense to start out with the facts, quote unquote, and then we can drift into the realm of um, drawing correlation, implying causation, and speculation, right?
Right.
So the facts are on November, I want to say it was the 5th, down in Houston, Texas. There was a concert, a Travis Scott concert at a place called Astroworld. And it was a very, very large concert. And it was, as far as I understand, like you had to be vaccinated to go there.
Mm-hmm.
There were some other people there. Drake was there. And it seems like some really, November 5th, 2021. This concert, it was really, there were a lot of really weird elements, and that's so, the theme that I wanted to sort of focus on today is occultism and the occult in art and music, but by extension culture. And some of, and we can put these, I'll send you these images so you can put them up so people can sort of follow along. The art accompanying this show was really unsettling. It was really heavy on like sort of demonic, and also the setup and the way that the stage was constructed. We'll get into really in the nitty-gritty of all this stuff later. It was very like old world occult, like in your face type stuff. And now this was held on November the 5th, which is not at all far from the date that they celebrate Samhain. And so they say that week, sort of around that date, is when the veil is thinnest. And
Is that the same time frame as, was it Bath? Is that the Bath Festival, the Cat God? I think that's around the same. That might be earlier in the year. Never mind.
I'm not sure, but I do know that Samhain is it's like the feast of sacrifice. It's literally like when you sacrifice fucking children and virgins and shit. So background on, I don't know if you know anything about Travis Scott. If not, bless your heart. I didn't know a fucking thing about it before. So he is, I guess, married to Kylie Jenner.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've seen anything she's done lately. If not, again, bless your heart. Basically, there's that family. There's like some heavy duty shit going on. So, I've heard people from all walks of internet basically say that they are a family of like black witches and succubi, and they do this thing where they like attach themselves to these black men and then they drain their fucking soul. And so that's the idea, is that Travis Scott is like in the thrall of essentially this family. And so, and the other thing is that the date that the concert was on was Kris Jenner, who's the matriarch of this family's 66th birthday. You can
of course. There it is.
Okay. And so they reported 8 dead. There were a lot of people that died. Basically, so a ton of these kids were dying of cardiac arrest from presumably being vaccinated and also being at a concert where, and the other thing is a lot of people were just straight up trampled. Like this concert. So, and we can post some links to this, but the last few days I was fascinated by this. So I was doing research on it. It was really dark. And there was like a couple fans and they were like, this concert was hell. It was like attending a concert in hell. And the imagery and the symbolism, the beginning of the show, it was like this like crazy dark like metal organ music was playing, like really, really satanic vibes. And there was like either a bat or a dove just on fire, like on this giant screen. And there was this big portal with flames. And it was like, okay, guys, like, what are we doing here? Like it was not subtle. And then the concert posters literally said they had a swirling portal with like, it was very like John D. Edward Kelly, like heavily, like absolutely no, it was not veiled. It was not. And it said, see you on the other side. That messaging was very prominent. It said in a few different places. It said on the screen at one point, then it said on the poster, and I'll send you all of this stuff. But yeah, it said, see you on the other side. So the hypothesis that a lot of people are running with is that this was just a big sacrificial ritual, because you get all these vaccinated people together. Oh, and the other thing is during the concert, I'll have to send you all this stuff. During the concert, numerous times fans came on stage, essentially screaming like, stop the show, there's people dying, like there's dead people, there's people dying right now, stop the show, stop the music. And they were just shut down. They were just ignored. Like they were like screaming. Literally at one point, Travis Scott was like, these two guys come up and then he just dismisses them. Anyway, then you can see this guy and girl come up and they're screaming at this camera guy, and he's just like looks at them like once and then keeps like filming and just doesn't. They're just screaming like there's people dead down here. People are dying. So anyway, so what some of the people spoke about what happened from like eyewitness accounts, and which is not too uncommon in terms of a concert situation, what they describe, but at the same time, this is like particularly bad, and it seems like egregious, intentional neglect, if not like encouragement, outright encouragement of like loss of life and destruction of body. Basically, so like they said that a ton of people snuck into this show, so there was way more people than the venue was designed to hold. And they were everyone was crushed up against the front stage. And then the crowd started to sway. And essentially this sort of phenomenon that happens at concerts where like if the crowd starts swaying too violently, then people start to sort of buckle, if you know what I mean, and go down. And so that's what happened. And according to this one dude, like he at one point fell to the ground, and he said while he was on the ground, he looked to his right and left and realized that there was a floor of bodies being trampled at this concert. Like there were just so many people that it was completely, I don't know, to whatever extent that's true. But so the final thing, and then we can kind of, I don't know, get into more of a dialogue. And this is what made me think of this would be good to put an episode on, because it's all like speculation, right, or whatever. It's it's sort of just a trope. But for me, the smoking gun, if you will, is when you have something that is like an established image. And I know I can damn well near guarantee that you have seen this Hieronymus Bosch painting, or this painting that's attributed to Hieronymus Bosch, definitely fits in with his style. And it's called Christ in Limbo, and that's where that little detail is taken from.
Mm-hmm.
With what I don't, and I've actually been looking for the quote unquote proper name, the demonological, symbological name for that mouth
Mm-hmm.
thing, and I just call it the mouth of hell. I guess I was toying with the idea of like calling it the Gehenna Gate, which is like sort of like an Old Testament biblical thing. But anyway, but yeah, so that's. Did you here? Wait, let me send you. Here we go. This is good.
I've heard that referred to as the Maw or into the Maw, MAW.
MAW, right? The Maw of Hell. Yeah. So yeah, look at these last two images I just sent you. So this is you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's at the top. It's literally a giant portal in a flaming mountain that says "See you on the other side," and then you see that like zombified, like neon, like weird fucking looking Travis Scott head. Looks exactly like the Maw in this Euronymous Bosch, which is like a portal to hell. And has the legions spilling forth. And so let's kick it off. I was like, am I just gonna? Well, what I wanted to bring up is I was just looking at some of this artwork, right? I don't know. Are you familiar with Crow 777?
Yes.
So I was listening to him one time, and I could just keep listening to him. I think his voice sounds so like cute. I don't know how else to describe it. Like it's just like it's like ASMR. He sounds very Wisconsinian to me. Like he's like or Minnesota nice. I don't know. Like it's like a weird, and he's in Rhode Island, so it makes no sense whatsoever. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. He was talking about the Renaissance at one point. He was talking about how the timelines have been screwed with and this and that. And he was like, yeah, so supposedly the Renaissance was this amazing revival of all this art, where they just started painting naked people having orgies. And I was like, huh, they really did do that. And it's like, it's supposed to be this high religious art, but it really is a lot of naked people writhing on top of each other. If you think about it, like eating grapes and shit, just really not, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of that. Even the Christian stuff, it's like just naked, like bosoms and things spilling.
Yeah.
In a very, kind of like Baroque, like, oh, it's all fine, artsy, fartsy stuff. But nonetheless, it's like when you stand back, it's like that's a bunch of naked people spilled out on top of each other.
The idea that because why were they doing that, or what were those things depicting? By and large, were either religious or pagan mythologies or mythological stories.
I think a lot of it was quote unquote religious scenes, but depicted in an exceedingly pagan way.
Sure, absolutely, and much of what the Christian church has done over the years is just try and convert people to it from whatever pagan belief they have. That's been Christianity's kind of MO, is to take pagans and turn them into Christians.
It's a thinly veiled repainting.
And so if they need to, offer you some repackaged form of your paganism, they have no problem doing that. Never have. And so I think it's from that backdrop, and then the fact that they were talking about theological issues again, but in the context of what was the Renaissance or the rediscovery of the ancient Greek Hellenistic kind of library and canon, which as the narrative goes, they wouldn't have really had in Europe during the Middle Ages. Except maybe after the 900s and early part of the second millennium, I guess, after 1000, that is when they would have had a little more contact with Muslim scholars at the time, who were again, according to the narrative, well advanced to the Christians at that point in Europe. And so the rediscovery of that Hellenistic understanding and worldview, and then the accompanying gods, and the rediscovery of those stories, and those stories being told with gods constantly being, it was kind of understood that the gods were naked. They didn't have need of clothes. They weren't shameful humans. So that lent itself. But yeah, there was certainly there was a lot of lewd and lascivious behavior in the papacy. You look at the Borgias and that whole, several of popes in the 1400s and into the 1500s that were, I think objectively, even to the church's eyes, not really the best as far as a PR image for the papacy goes. And some of that, excess was shown in the art. So I think, yes, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just trying to give some broader context. I think that's absolutely, that makes sense. And, the broader context just being that the papacy at the time was pretty indulgent and didn't mind throwing money around and didn't mind skirting the envelope of what was accepted behavior in the pious sector of the society. So anyway, go on.
No, that's really good point. I think, yeah, I mean, and that touches on something we talked about, about the patronage of the arts, by sort of the likes of like the Medici and the Borgia, and they say that the image of Christ that we now all are used to is just Cesare Borgia's, essentially like the icon of him, because it just, when you're working for this family, it's like kind of, they expect you to glorify their image, but what I was going to say is that it's just interesting. And for me now, Christianity is like, I'm realizing it's sort of like a beef Wellington, where it's like, when you first interact with it, you're biting the very outside and you're like, oh, this is pretty good, I guess. And then it's
flaky
like,
and crusty.
And it's flaky and crusty. And you're like, I mean, it might not be the healthiest thing, but yeah, it's got a nice little texture. And then you bite through it and you bite down further and you're like, whoa.
What is this mushroom layer? What is going on? That's what then a lot of people go, I'm not going any farther because I don't like mushrooms. But they don't even get to the fact there's a delicious steak in the middle.
Exactly. Right. And so, and so I feel like
analogy.
Yeah, my analogies have always been known for their colorfulness. But yeah, so essentially, I guess, yeah, it's like, because when people think of Christianity, right, they think of like Roman Catholicism or a reaction against Roman Catholicism, right? At least in America, generally. That's sort of like the, it's like, we're Christian. And that's really all post what we are talking about when we talk about, Renaissance, sort of like that period of art and of Christian art that is, anterior to, or I should say posterior, that comes after, the Holy Roman Empire, or during the Holy Roman Empire, like that whole period, like the Roman Christianity. Okay. So, and the decidedly Western version thereof. And so I was just thinking, because this is all stuff that I've been looking at lately. And it's just interesting to contrast the style of art, but also what is depicted with things like the Eastern artistic and stylistic traditions and lineages, which are totally different, both in style and in what is depicted. I mean, you never see any naked people anywhere. You just don't. It's just not done. Like it's like a lot of gold leaf, a lot of
You'll see it.
stylized, like
You'll
long
see it.
straight
You'll see it.
noses.
You'll see some nudity from time. Very not very prevalent, but from time to time in Islamic art from probably the 1250s on to the 1450s. Here and there, and like harem depictions and stuff. You'll scantily
Right.
clad, or see through. But yes, you're absolutely right. Now I'm thinking about the rest of the
But yeah, well, I'm
world at
thinking
the time.
specifically of like the Eastern Orthodox and
Yeah, yeah,
Byzantine, like that stuff is like no,
yeah.
like there's not even a whisper of it. It's like
Yeah,
we
and
don't.
even in the Far East too,
Yeah, no, they don't do that shit.
and subcontinent. Yeah, you're right.
And so I just that just sort of came to mind, and it's interesting because as I sort of floated this like last episode, art as a voodoo doll for mass consciousness, right? So what you do in art, what you do, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a voodoo doll. It's more like it's like the trampoline that you leap into the subconscious from, like the art is the launch pad that launches off like ideas and trends and behavior patterns, if you will, or thought patterns too,
Mm-hmm.
into the zeitgeist of the time. And so I just found it fascinating that right around the time that you have this sort of split, right? In Christianity, and it was very much connected to this like stuff that you would know about, but that most people don't really know about yet, with like the ecumenical councils and the filioque controversy and stuff. And I don't know why I read about this stuff now. I just think it's interesting. Sue me. I'm just like,
I'm fascinated by it too. So,
and it's like nobody, again, it's like all these quote unquote Christians, like nobody has a fucking clue about this shit for the most part. Like if you talk to them
yeah.
about it, they're just like,
And
what?
I was, that's one of the weird, things that I guess was kind of lucky, or I'm grateful for, regardless, because it was, foundational for me. Was I went to a private Christian school, K through 8th grade, and it was a Missouri Synod Lutheran church that was running the school. And Missouri
Wait.
Synod Lutheran is a denomination of the Lutheran Church that's a little more old school, a largely Germanic back ancestry. So it was a little more. I kind of joked that it was Catholic light, same great religion, but with half the guilt, because it was a lot of things that were similar, but some of the things that were different were definitely highlighted in my education there, my indoctrination there. And one of them was that, hey, Martin Luther, who Lutheran is named after, was really against these things called indulgences. And so when I was in like 6th grade or whatever learning about this, I was like, whoa. Like even then I was just like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. If the church was like, look, your dad has been dead for 10 years. He's been in purgatory this whole time, and he's going to be in purgatory for another 20 years. Unless you can give us 500 gold coins or whatever, and then he'll only be in there for another 5 years, and then he'll go to heaven. And like the audacity of the church, and that they thought that, even then I was just like, how would they possibly think they would get away with something like that? And, so then the Catholic schism, the Protestant schism and the Reformation happened and stuff like that went by the wayside. But that was just one of many examples I would learn later as I, had seen that happen. And as I would look through history again, go, oh, there's the church doing something like that again, but with a different attempt. And it maybe didn't get caught this time, or it did get caught this time. It was just kind of a repackaged, the church has, it's just a crazy thought. And it's not the first time the church has been like, oh yeah, also, if you want to worship the pagan Roman gods, that's really not a big deal.
Well,
And there was a time where that was totally the case.
I feel like the racket just doesn't change. And I mean, even now it's just like, the whole church thing. Like, I feel like religion, it's like, if religion was the Energizer Bunny, like someone kind of forgot to change the battery pack, and now it's like, they were like, we need a new face for this stuff. So now you have the Church of, medical tyranny and the Church of climate science, wherein it's like, well, it's not even, it's honestly, in a way, it's even more, I don't know, brazen, I guess is the word. It's like, well, no, we determine now it's science, the Church of Science. We've done the climate science. Don't worry. You don't do any of the science.
Well, can I see the science? No. It's far too complicated.
It's
we talk
too
about
arcane.
Carbon and oxygen
and
rain.
You need an electron microscope.
Rain.
You need an alchemy lab in your basement. You actually you can't see the data until you have personally transmuted lead into gold.
Right.
But we've determined that there's far too much carbon, and so we're gonna tax you for fucking breathing and driving and eating and shitting and everything. And I mean, at least with the indulgences.
Unless you're a corporation, then we'll set up some tax pyramid in order to shuffle guilt around while we blame and gaslight the individual for, if the climate science was accurate, something that is not being caused by just random Joe driving to the store.
Well, and if you're a corporation, as a fringe benefit, we have programs where we can get government subsidies and tax dollars to help you figure out how to market your waste that you would have to pay money to dispose of, like your spent nuclear fuel, and market it to people in their products, like the sodium fluoride that's in toothpaste, which is a product of nuclear power plants.
Or the fluoride in water, which is a byproduct of the aluminum production process.
Or whatever. Maybe that's, it's an industrial byproduct. Yes. Right. And so,
so you're talking about sodium fluoride, and the water is, no, it's not sodium fluoride. It's another potassium chloride or
it's like hydrofluorosilicate or something like that. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that.
I'm not a geologist or water.
I'm not a water geologist.
Waterologist.
I'm not an aquologist.
I don't claim to be a chemist.
A hydrologist? Anyway.
Chemistry in high school. That's my qualification.
Nice.
I think I dropped that chemistry class in college. So
I'm not always a chemist.
Class for 1 day or 2 days, and I was like, I don't want to study chemistry anymore. So I dropped it, and I probably picked up like African and ancient Eastern history or something. I think.
That's not a big jump.
That was a good course.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, history is, I don't know. I think history is more interesting than science. And also, like, listen, if you had to choose, I mean, you can always study science. And if you wait longer, generally there's more cool shit that people have figured out. Whereas if you wait too long to study history, they could just burn it all. It's happened before.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to make this point before I forget it. So Hieronymus Bosch, he was, I promise there's I have an actual point. That's why I'm pressing the issue, if you will, so to speak.
No worries.
So let's start back. So we had these Byzantine and Eastern Orthodox sort of artists, this art style, and this art style to me is a very so this is kind of how I want to frame it. The things that are depicted in art and the way that they're depicted, it is creating a center of gravity, if you will, for the human imagination. Right, because what the human imagination feeds on, if you will, is images. Right? I mean, we have images in our day-to-day life, but we've been a little bit desensitized to those images just because we have so many symbol systems vying for our attention. Especially now, we have screens, we have language, and it's sort of there's nothing special, if you will, about just an image out there in the world that you interact with every day, right? It's you sort of, I mean, again, that's what consciousness is designed to filter out. Whereas when you interact with an artwork, there's something different going on because it's immediately like, oh, well, this has been curated, you know. And also, I mean, if you're looking at like a Byzantine icon, it's like gold leaf and like there's the figure of Christ all slender in the middle, and it's like these quadrants and these like golden halos and like calligraphy, and like it just looks really cool, and you're like, whoa, what's that? So it really goes into your inner world, right? So let's say that can be like our first little vignette or triptych or panel or whatever. Then in the middle, right, we have this sort of more Roman Vatican kind of images traditionally associated with Christian art by our Western viewing audience. So, you know, like cherubs, aka naked babies, you know, Virgin Mary, aka naked woman or Venus, and it just gets the boundaries get very blurry. It gets very interchangeable. It's like, what am I looking at? This is a Christian painting, looks really pagan. There's a lot of voluptuous, you know, breasts in unclear gravitational, like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of like,
just, it's a lot of idealized, I think, for at the time.
Well, let's put it right.
You know,
let's put it this way.
They were painting what they wanted their ideal woman to look like, right, in a lot of respects. I mean, at the Botticelli's Venus, you know, that's a 10 for 1650 or whenever the hell that was painted.
Right, and I've heard it discussed that, you know, people are like, well, why are they? It's like, first of all, they're not fat. That is just a ridiculous, like that is a reflection of our culture, that someone would look at that and say that person's that's just crazy. You know, if your ideal woman is like doing P90X, and that's like, you know, then maybe relative to that. But the other thing is, of course, they were more had more substance, because back then, like at any given point, a famine or a bubonic plague could just roll through, and you wouldn't want a Kate Moss in that situation, because she could not carry a child through a famine.
Exactly. And that's the whole, I mean, if you're talking of a time where, you know, statistically speaking, if you want to have 5 kids, you're going to have 12 kids. You know, it was, you know, just statistically, many kids weren't going to live. And so the woman would be pregnant as often as not in her productive, you know, reproductive years.
A tradition the Orthodox Jews have kept alive.
What's that?
The woman being pregnant throughout her life. I can attest to it.
Yeah, and you know, the Mormon church has certainly helped to keep that going. I think Catholics, particularly in the Latin world, still kind of,
that's true,
you know, prefer larger families. Maybe not quite as big, but, you know, more like 5 than a two child, 1 child American family. And Mormons, yeah. I mean, I knew some. I grew up with a lot of Mormons in my neighborhood and stuff, and yeah, it was like every one of them had at least 4 kids. What's
the deal? I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but what is the deal with Mormons? Like, what is going on there? Like, that's just like, the more I find out about them, I'm like,
yeah, it's interesting. So it's funny. I was walking down the street about 2 weeks ago, and here come these 2 18-year-old kids in their nice little white pressed Oxford shirts and their ties, and it's almost sundown, and so I could tell they're finishing up their day. And I seem to just come across Mormons. I always have. I had a couple Mormons that I met, and like 2 days later, they were driving down the street and helped me push my truck up like a slight hill to the gas station. Like, they'd come to my door, and then like 2 days later, truck, what did it do? I don't know, something happened, but they were like, oh, they just pulled up behind me. They're like, we'll help you push it. And I was like, all right, thanks. Anyway, I just run into Mormons all the time. But these two stopped me, and they're like, hey, you want to talk about Mormonism? I'm like, if you want to, but you guys don't want to talk to me about it. Oh, why? And they had you know, you want to, we got a copy of the Book of Mormon. And I was like, you know, I don't have one right now. I'll take it, which I think kind of threw them off. But it was true. I didn't have one, and it's nice to have as a reference book. But nonetheless, it's just, It's like if Christianity wasn't good enough because it didn't have enough like fantasy science fiction elements to it, so they really just wanted to find it was like, we'll go for that market that really doesn't feel like Christianity is mystical enough in like a flashy sci-fi pseudo fantasy way. But that was really, which was a stepping stone to what really was like the like scientific religion for its time, which is Scientology, and the whole background of, who the most prolific author in American history is, who's written the most books, more books than any other person.
I have a feeling you're about to tell me, and I do think I know who it is based on context.
Yes, because there's quite a bit of context clue there.
Is it L. Ron Hubbard?
It's L. Ron Hubbard. That's correct. So he really, and most of them are science fiction, terrible science fiction novels. Not many of them. I mean, it's just so many. He wrote like 900 books or something. Because all those little Scientology tracts, that he published. It was like him talking and somebody transcribed it and they say, oh, this is written by L. Ron Hubbard. That count. Anything that he ever published, almost however long or short, he published as a book, so it counts. But he wrote a ton of sci-fi, a fair amount of science fiction novels, and they're all terrible. The most notable of which is, of course, Battlefield Earth, which became the greatest Scientology movie of all time with Travolta and Kelly Preston and lots of makeup and starfighters and spaceships. But to go back to Mormonism, you also have to put it around again, from the historical narrative, the worldview of the people in the early 1800s, particularly 1815 to 1840, and on as it kind of started to gel and shift a little bit. But the whole renewed Christian revival, I think it's called the Christian revival era, which was particularly big up there in central New York and Pennsylvania and kind of that North Atlantic coast area, or central and northern Atlantic coast area. It was a big thing. There was a lot of upstart. I wouldn't say it wasn't really a reformation. It was just people starting to move towards a more individualized view of Christianity, because a lot of the generational pilgrims and families were either Quaker or was a Friend of God Society. That might not be what it's called, or a fairly puritanical form of Protestantism or Anglicanism. And then, of course, you had the Catholics, the Irish, and to a degree the Italians, but less so in the early 1800s, mostly Irish then. Anyway, a fair amount of Italians in New York in the area at the time. Anyway, point being, it was a lot of white kind of, I almost say it was like the way that kids viewed, and the generation after World War II kind of viewed their parents and were trying to find a new way to express their spiritual identity. And you kind of had the hippie movement and the New Age thing born out of that. I think there's something similar happening in the wake of the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and kind of all of that. Again, this is as the historical narrative goes, which I'm not saying is true. But there was a lot of change and a lot of, people looking at the world in a new way. And so that kind of engendered looking at spiritualism in a new way, and that engendered a lot of you wouldn't be going to this church or that church. You would be going to hear this person preach, and he might be at this church or that church, but you're going to listen to this guy's version of whatever, as opposed to the church. It was just this guy. And so that started to happen more and more. And then, Joseph Smith, and you can go into the whole stones, the white stone and the black stone, and what those might actually have been. And, was it even possible for Joseph Smith to have written that book in that time frame? And I've seen some interesting research that says, yes, him and a couple of people could easily have written the Book of Mormon in 6 or 9 months, maybe, fairly easily, working 4 or 5 hours a day. Wouldn't have been that hard. Because a lot of people think, oh, there's no way Joseph Smith wrote it. He couldn't have written that much that fast. Anyway, but it just took off for whatever reason, and I have to think based on the area in which all of this stuff happened and kind of the occult and mystical nature of the history of that area, which goes into the Susquehanna River again. But there's a lot of, I think, I think that was a ritual to install this new version of religion to get people trapped in. And it happened in a particular time and place for a particular reason, as was the case with L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard was almost certainly a intelligence agent, naval or central intelligence.
Yeah, wasn't he running around with Jack Parsons and stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely running around with Jack Parsons. Of course, was he the co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory? He also designed the Pentagon. Yeah, they definitely hung out together. I can't remember if L. Ron Hubbard was involved in the star ritual.
They were doing the Babylon working or whatever.
Yeah,
they were continuing.
Yeah, that was right. So the star ritual was somebody else, and Parsons.
But actually, you've navigated this whirlwind into exactly where I needed it to go to bring us full.
Somehow we do this every week.
That's the thing. My eyes like unfocused, and I just started daydreaming, and then I was like, "I'll just wait. We'll get to where we need to go." There. And we did, and we are. So So going back to, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard. So that's. I'm trying to do like a historical number line here. Okay, so we're stretching. So we're stretching far back into antiquity. Let's say. The Canaanite, the mouth of Moloch or the gate of Moloch or whatever with this, so that whole cult of sacrifice, right? Where you would have children burned in the bowels of this bronze statue or whatever with the body of it. So you're familiar with that. So that's like far antiquity. Then, we have, a bunch of other shit that I may not necessarily be hip to or I'm going to describe right now. Then we've got sort of the flowering of Christianity, the initial, if you will, right? And the reason that I focus on, and a lot of my research right now is in some of this stuff, so that's part of the reason I use this example. I also just think it's a cool example, and it's really not something like people talk about a lot, specifically like the Byzantine Eastern Orthodox. It's sort of like this like forlorn, like when people say Christianity, I guarantee you nobody's thinking of that unless you're like, well, what about Greek Orthodox? And they're like, oh yeah, well, huh.
When in fact, if you talked about Roman Christianity for 1,000 years, from 400 to 11 Saccharum to the fall of Constantinople in 1453, that whole time Christianity was really centered. Yeah, there was a pope in Rome, but the central heart of Roman Christianity was in Constantinople. And yeah, you're right, but not enough people realize that.
So you have right. So you had that, and you had that art style and the accompanying style of religious discourse, which I just, not to put too fine a point on it, but I just want to emphasize that was a really different. I won't even say religion. That was a really different form of spirituality from Roman and Western Christianity. Like the focus was on philosophy and mysticism and a lot of these really like higher concepts. Whereas Western Christianity was mainly focused on things like the legal system, social control, politics, and like wealth. Let's be real. So then you have this schism or whatever, the ecumenical council stuff, right? And you have the Western Pope, like whatever, excommunicates the Eastern branch and is like, no, it's the whatever it was. It's the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, and that was a big deal. And then you have the Renaissance, and you have this Renaissance art, which is a huge departure from this like very, I don't want to say austere, but like this very like prim and proper like Byzantine art. Because like for, and everyone loves to hate on Christianity, and back in the day I did too. But it's like, look, if you've got young kids, right, and you want to tell them a story and you want an accompanying visual aid, what would you rather have as a visual aid? Like a nice little golden haloed Christ with like gold leaf and like beautiful lettering, or a bunch of naked people spilling down a fucking water slide out of Zeus's, mouth or whatever? Like, so in that sense, and that this is sort of the point that I want to develop, is the type of art that you put out there, especially in a time period like that, where like, they didn't have TiVo or like Netflix, it was like art. It was like you went around and the stuff that was adorning the churches, or, these painted icons, like that was the thing. That was the stuff that would populate the imagination of the people. And so fast forward, what do we have to populate the imagination of the people now? Let's just think about that for a minute. We have filth and lyrics so bad that it would be an insult to poetry and to words to call them terrible poetry. And, music videos that are, they are just... they're just absolutely drowning people in this dark occult symbolism. And so, like, there's a video of Kylie. So I guess Kylie Jenner is Travis Scott's wife or whatever, and they have kids together. And there's a fairly recent video of her. Oh man, I want to send it to you so you can see it. It's just her literally just bathing in blood. Like it's just like her, like, yeah, like it's a very like Lilith sort of succubant, like it's a creepy fucking video. Like, the music, it's just it's sort of like the message that it sends is like, yeah, like we're not hiding this, like this is just what it is. And so, and there's also, yeah,
I think they're done hiding it. I think
they are.
I think the time the veil has dropped, and it's just gonna get more and more commonplace to have that.
Agreed. And well, and the other thing is, so there's like one clip from this concert where Travis Scott. I'll send you all of this. Although you could probably locate it pretty easily, but I will send it to you. Essentially, it is like the most peak dystopian video footage reel that I have ever seen, inclusive of everything with COVID and the masks and the crazy, grocery stores, all of that, everything, any protest, nothing in my mind, nothing will even touch this. And that is these paramedics and like these medical people and concert goers just like milling around in absolute pandemonium and panic and holding this body of this kid. And you just hear them and they're just screaming because he's like dying. And the camera is focused on them. And then some of these people are like looking up, sort of top left of scene. And they're like, ah, and you just hear them sort of like crying something at whatever. And then the camera just moves over and it's Travis Scott, the guy whose concert. And he's standing on top of this like platform thing with just dead eyes, like just vacant. And he's just got his microphone and he's looking straight down. He's looking through, really. He's looking through the body of this dead kid, literally just watching the life go out from his body. And the vibe is like everyone's waiting to see like when he'll notice that this is going on or what he'll do. But then you realize like he's like fully like this is the goal of the concert, and he's like fully aware, and he's just singing just this haunting, like macabre, like vocoder death march note, and this kid is just dying, and everyone's going crazy, and they're like, and he's just like, yeah, yeah, and it's like, it's just the most bleak moment of just total insanity and just like complete, just abject disregard for the value of human life. And I was like, yep, this is the one. Like, I haven't seen anything worse than that. I don't know. So I'll send that to you.
Yeah. And I wasn't surprised. I was hoping you were going to do simulate the noise, because I'm not at all surprised to hear it sound like a cow or bull sort of groan or bellow or whatever noise it is those animals make. But yeah, it's certainly ties in. I mean, there's a lot of, from a symbolism standpoint, there's a lot of really straightforward Baal Moloch worship, ceremonial worship right there. And you touched on it being Samhain, and you touched on the Ma gateway to the underworld, kind of, and then so to have him kind of at the height of the ceremony channeling the frequency of that particular type of a being, because what is a concert's all about sound, right? So to do that at the height of that particular moment, yeah, of course. I mean, that's just, as fucked up as it is, that's just the way that those rituals work.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I don't know. And the whole thing with see you on the other side, like,
well,
I guess hindsight is 2020, but yeah, it just blows my mind. It's like, and there's just there's just kids just being funneled into this, and they're like, yeah, I don't know.
Here's my little green language. When you said see you on the other side, I wrote see you on the other side, and then I went, well, that looks like see you John D other side. So
yeah, well, and so the posters, I don't know if did you catch some of
them.
The posters, they have and I mean, full disclosure, even I've drawn stuff like this, okay? So it's in the Zeitgeist, but the stuff with the hands and the eyes, and the where's the other one? Oh man, well now it's not. There's one with like the poster, and it has see you on the other side, and it's literally like that. It's like a swirling gateway with eyes around it, and that's like the most John D thing I could think of. You know what I mean? Is just like a spiral with eyes around it. And again, it's very, and so this kind of brings it back a little bit to some of the biblical stuff, because a lot of the descriptions in the Bible of the angels and stuff are like this, just like wheels of eyes and stuff. And so it's interesting that it seems, I wonder what your take is on this. It almost seems like, depending on the spiritual maturity or spiritual responsibility of the channeler or contactee, I don't know, for the person that is dealing with these entities or spirits, it almost seems like this is my speculation, but it almost seems like if you try to contract with these entities in and of themselves, is almost always demonic. Like they will fucking screw you over. They just want souls.
Mhm.
But in this sort of divine hierarchy situation where like you kind of have to set the ground rules, and like it's very, in a way it is very legalistic. It's like very jurisdictional, you know? That's why, I don't know, I'm sure you've heard of like the common law stuff, and it's all about jurisdiction. Because you know, a court can do whatever they want to you, but you can always invoke a higher jurisdiction, in which case they're like, oh, fuck, you're not supposed to know about that. And you're like, yeah, actually, what you're doing is this, and this is actually, you know, maritime or law merchant, and that's actually not valid in this case. And so I invoke a higher jurisdiction, and you basically can't continue doing any of these things until you, you know, make good on my request to have my case heard at a higher jurisdiction. So I feel like in a way, with some of this spiritual stuff, it's like you have to know, you know, and that's why people are so big on the higher power stuff, whether it's the Christian version or whatever. It's like you have to have that higher appeal, because if you don't have that higher appeal, then you're like at the mercy of these forces, you know. Yeah, I don't know. I keep saying lately, I'm like, I don't know if I need Christianity or Jesus, but I definitely need, I think we all need what it promises to deliver and protect us from in these times.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's getting dicey out there.
Yeah. And, you know, I always say that, you know, the idea that you're supposed to just believe in Jesus, like Jesus was like, hey, you should just believe in me, is kind of farcical. Like Jesus came down to be like, look, or if Jesus was a real person, I think what Jesus was here to do was to say, look, live like this. This is how you live morally, and this is what principles you should carry around with you. And like, you know, don't steal, treat other people the way you want to be treated, drink a bit of wine at a wedding, like whatever, just hang out and be groovy, you know? And you know, obviously that message gets perverted, and don't really remember why I brought that up now.
Well, no, I think you were gonna say the absurdity of like, well, just believe this,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
versus right.
Like,
And I agree. I
I
agree
like
with that.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that you know, but so I would say, you know, to respond to what you were saying, then I would, you know, it's not that we need Jesus, like we just need to believe in him. That doesn't really, you know, it's like you just need to believe in Santa Claus. Okay, what's that going to do? Nothing. You're just going to walk around thinking Santa Claus exists, and that's it. You know, it doesn't change the real world. Jesus existed, and you believe in him. He existed. If he didn't exist and you believe in him, he doesn't exist. Like your belief is doesn't change, is irrelevant too. Point is, I think it's a good model of, or good like allegory for how to learn to how to live and how to be and all that stuff. So to live like that, I think, is a far more noble aspiration than to just believe that someone like that existed at one point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very similar to, you know, I know I keep saying this, but you know, it's like, it's very similar to the types of, whether or not people think of them as such, the religious systems of today, like scientism, which is like, no, just believe this. Like we know we've worked it all out. We figured it all out. Here, we're gonna smack a book in front of you, but don't even read it. Don't read it. It's hard, you know, because that's kind of how people are with the Bible too. It's like, oh, this is the word of God. Don't even, you know, it's like, do study it, but don't expect to understand it. Well, what I was going to say, though, that's really interesting, I've been getting into this lately, is a lot of these, I don't even know if the word Christians really applies. A lot of these newer, maybe that word's not, some of these people that study scripture from this very interesting place of like biochemistry, and like they interpret. So I was checking this stuff out the other day. Basically, they were talking about how like it has to do with like the internal alchemy of the fluid. There's like a fluid anyway. So basically, like it's interesting because you mentioned Santa Claus. They were saying the origin of the word Santa Claus um, has to do with the claustrum, and the claustrum is an area of it's the like the foundation of the higher brain. It's like literally the root tissue that the rest of the neocortex like comes up out of. It's
And
almost like the mice.
it sits at the top of the spinal cord, and basically the kundalini, or cerebral spinal energy, travels down to the lower chakra and back up, and that's Santa going up and down the chimney and leaving gifts.
Right. Yeah.
Probably
So
describing the kundalini sexual experience.
right. Well, or I don't know that. Right. I don't know that there's only one version of it, but essentially,
Yeah.
what
From that.
Yeah. No, well, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad that you have the background, because it would have. I don't think I could have hashed that out that quickly with the way that I talk. But they were just talking about how the cross is like the anyway. I don't have to go on a tear with all this. Basically, I'm
curious.
I just thought it was really interesting. Basically, they talk about how so like whether or not, I just found this really interesting, whether or not Christ existed, this whole thing is like it's a visual metaphor, right? Because, and again, back to that book, Joseph P. Farrell, it's sort of, because so many people bash on Christianity because they're like, oh, no, this just came to supplant and destroy everything. It's like, well, if you take it literally, right? Which is, and again, like that is that sort of Roman kind of Christianity that's like, bam, like putting down the hammer, like, yeah, you just believe, again, believe this, believe exactly this, and visualize exactly this, and like, don't use your imagination, don't get creative with it. Whereas, I just think it's really interesting, because why in that way would the Bible be different from any of these other sacred texts, like the Upanishads or whatever, where, they're not like, there's a magical fluid that's secreted by this gland, don't have, it's not like that. It's more flowery and everything. There's symbols, because it's easier to teach something to people using symbols than it is using complex technical and mathematical jargon. This because mathematical and technical jargon changes so much, or scientific, I should say, throughout the years, whereas symbols are much more easy to work with. Although now we're still a very long time now removed from these symbols, and worse yet, we've been captivated by this very aggressive literalism and dogma, which is preventing us from doing this sort of discursive meditation that we're supposed to do with a lot of this stuff, where it's like one time I took mushrooms and I was reading the Bible and I was like, holy fuck, what is going on right now? Like, I was like, I know exactly what they're talking about. It was crazy. Like, it was, I still remember that. Sometimes I think about that. This guy that I lived with gave me like this tiny little Bible, and I was like, why are you giving me this? And he was like, everyone should have a Bible. I was like, okay, man, thanks. Cool. Yeah, and then I was just, one day I just started reading it that day, and something just compelled me, and I was reading it, and I was like, blown away. And I just, it really struck me that I was like, it's been turned into this like boring thing that no one wants to do, so much of life has been sort of sterilized in this way, like if you're a kid and you have to like go play the fucking trombone or whatever, and you're like, oh man, it's like this very reluctant. And again, when you take that attitude towards something, like, you're not going to derive very much good from it. But yeah, I just think it's fascinating, because I think that, and that's why I focus on Eastern tradition, because like they're really careful to just literally change nothing. Like they literally this schism happened when they were like, okay, you guys change one thing, we're done with you. You're crazy. Like it's over. Like irreconcilable.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
they wanted to change a few words, and but I think there's a wisdom in that, because again, it's like if you think everything is literal, then you can kind of take more of a liberty with it, because it's like, well, it's just this thing, it won't matter if we change a few words. But if you're more into the mysticism and the philosophy and the that kind of stuff, then it's like, well, no, because we don't, at least this is how I look at it, and I haven't really like gone crazy studying Torah or anything, but I guess you could go that direction with this too. And people do, like, you're not supposed to delete even a single letter, because I don't know if you and I spoke about this, but prior to the 1800s, apparently there were no spaces in all of Torah. It was just a block of letters, continuous, beginning to end, something like 380,000 letters or something. And it was left up to the discernment of the student or the whatever, disciple, whatever, to interpret that. And I just think it's really interesting, because from the standpoint of, allegory or something like gematria, or like these like mystical kind of ways of interpreting a text, it's like, yeah, if you delete a few letters, like you're really screwing with the text a lot, because
And that's why I think that's why it's has led to even the suggestion, and I don't know anything about this except that I've heard it suggested, that it is either literally in some way or allegorical to, or analogous to, a genomic sequence. So if you had a genome laid out as you would, without any spaces or anything, how much would you change the production of that genome if you just changed a couple letters here and there? And the answer is pretty drastically, and probably with lots of unintended consequences. So I think that sprung people to the idea that, well, it's probably is the human genome just encoded in a some sort of a biblical code, which is an interesting thought. But
oh yeah, that's right up my alley.
I don't know anything more than somebody has had that thought and probably done some research, but I haven't.
They certainly talk a lot about the genome.
Yeah.
In the Torah, at least. I mean,
Noah, who was perfect in his generations.
exactly. Yeah. Right. And again, and yeah. So anyway, I don't want to turn anyone off by getting too biblical, although that was at the beginning. But yeah. So I mean, to return to just talking about symbolism, I think they've really shown their hand.
Mm-hmm.
With this. I see this as kind of a big move, because it's like, I mean, it's a huge concert, and you sort of lose plausible deniability when, like, you have like this gigantic mouth with people coming out of it, like in this Middle Age painting by, this Dutch guy that like was really into like macabre, grotesque, like hellish imagery, and was basically telling people like, if you live a certain way, aka like this, bad things will happen to you. You're exposing yourself to some really dark forces. And like just in my mind at least, that juxtaposed with like all of these clueless young kids that are like, what? I'm gonna get vaccinated. Okay. And then just like, probably like on all kinds of drugs, drinking. Not that there's anything objectively wrong with that, and then going to see terrible music on top of it. That's the last outrage. Straw.
And not to take us too far off the rails here, but you'd kind of mentioned, what my thoughts were about what all this was, and just based on what I'm hearing from you and related imagery. So, extremely cursory look at this. And based on other things, I've seen and understand, of course, This is a pretty. I mean, obviously it's a pretty blatant ritual. And obviously, yes, I think the hand is well overplayed. But as far as the forces at work go and what all of this, where it's all going.
Wait, before you, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
I just want you to be able to integrate all points. One thing I think I failed to mention is that I don't know how much you know about the Kardashians or the Jenners or whatever, and I am loath to even have that name pass upon my lips, but unfortunately, when in Rome, but so there's the three sisters, right? The KKK, as my roommate said today, whose names shan't be uttered, right? And then there's their mother, right? Who is Kris Jenner. So she is the matriarch of this whole family of fucking vile succubi, right? The day of the concert was her 66th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I mentioned that or if I'm just repeating it. I apologize.
But thank you for mentioning it again.
That's the thing that people are saying, that this is like they were just parading these souls to her or for her.
And the other member of the family that rarely, if ever, gets talked about is George. Was that the dad? Is his first name George?
Bruce?
No. Kardashian.
Oh.
I guess the guy that the family name is from, I think it's George Kardashian. Anyway, he was really, really good friends with OJ. And he was actually he sat in on the jurors or the legal bench next to OJ pretty much the entire trial. So it was OJ, George Kardashian or John. I think it was George. And then if the glove don't fit, you must acquit, and Shapiro and whoever else was on, so Kardashian, I think it was George Kardashian, was on OJ and was very, very good friends with OJ and died under somewhat mysterious circumstances about 10 or so years after the trial, within 10 years of the trial or something. But yeah, he's the original, where the family got all their money, at least the Kardashians, he was a real estate tycoon from Greece and made a lot of money in the States and had, moved here and was into real estate. And so that's why they're rich in the first place. At least the Kardashian side.
Robert George Kardashian.
Robert. Maybe they call him George. Yeah, Robert George. I don't like that. Yeah.
Interesting. It's always real estate, isn't it?
It's always something, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, real estate's kind of a broad. I don't, he just made his money in real estate. Like, I don't, that's something people say, and I don't really know that means the same thing in two different, I don't know, anyway. Like, it's like Donald Trump. Oh, he made his money in real estate. Do I know what that means? Right. Not really.
Well, who really made that? I feel like we've got this thread now running through the episode, so I'm just going to go with it. Who really, oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah, Paxton came.
Anyway, Jared Kushner. That's who made their money in real estate. He really made money in real estate. He owns that building on Park Avenue. Oh. 666 Park Avenue.
666. He owns. Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah. I think it's Park Avenue.
There's a show about that.
Really?
2006, maybe. It was called 666 Park Avenue, and it was like this haunted high-rise, New York high-rise. The bald guy from Lost was in it. I only saw like 3 episodes, but I remember that it existed. Neither here nor there. But so the succubus, this is what I was kind of circling around. The whole succubus concept is certainly a compelling and interesting one. I think if it's too out there for some people, I don't think it's too dissimilar to describe that relationship or system for taking people's souls, so to speak. I don't think it's that much different from thinking about it just in terms of good old fashioned brainwashing. And I made a video, I can link to it. I made a shortish video about a year and change ago on brainwashing, where I went into the can't remember the name of the guy, but he was a psychologist. And after the Korean War, there were several American POWs who came back and were very reluctant to reintegrate into American life. And as they started to figure it out and do studies, these guys went through a very specific kind of prisoner treatment in which they were isolated, made to rely on one of their captors or their captors for food, isolated, basically had their personalities broken down and were able to be altered or replatformed. And then with that blank persona, they would start to ingrain or indoctrinate the Chinese communist ideology, because although it was the Korean War, the Chinese were the ones that were in charge of the prisoners, because got news for you. We didn't fight Korea in the Korean War. We fought China in the Korean War. Korea was just where it happened. And there were a few North Koreans that fought, but primarily we were fighting China. Anyway, the point being, they saw this recurrent theme and a methodology that was effective enough to at least get people who had been in it for, a couple of months or so to be very reluctant to reincorporate with their previous life, and identified more with the communist ideology that they had been given. So that whole blueprint is essentially how brainwashing works. And it's not like, this was not like some guy, this was like years of psychological studies, papers published. This guy broke down, he wrote a book on what exactly this technique was and how it was done. And that didn't, go overlooked at, the intelligence sector. And so it was very shortly after that MK Ultra and Project Monarch really got to the next level of systematizing. They were still doing a fair amount of experimenting in the 50s, and it wasn't really till the late 50s and early 60s that they really started to get the technique down as far as creating reliable alters in people's psyches. And so that started to come on the line. Point of that, and how does it relate to Travis Scott and the Kardashians? So very simply, whether it's some sort of satanic or demonic possession per se, or that this is just a family whose thing that they're hiding from everybody, their dirty little secret, is that they're really good at these techniques of psychological mind control. And at that point, it's kind of a sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic kind of. So are they just really good at this and it looks like magic, or is it actual magic? Does it really matter? I think there are certain families that have that as just part of what they know how to do. And it gets passed down mother to daughter in this case, in some case father to son, or in the case of some families from Gloria Vanderbilt to Anderson Cooper. Sorry, I had to. But whatever the case is, it gets passed along in the family. And again, is it because it's in their blood, or is it because they're the one raising their kids and teaching them and propagating that worldview and that mindset? Either way, is it magic or technology? I don't know that it really matters. But I think where it comes down to, I don't want people to go, oh, they're not demonically possessed, they're not incarnated succubi. That's ridiculous. Okay, or is that just another term for somebody who's really good at psychological manipulation and passes that knowledge to their family members so that their family can stay in a position of power or blackmail or whatever it is that they're doing, and therefore playing into that belief tradition, and therefore playing into those rituals, and therefore making, dressing it up in as much magical trapping as possible, so that when they're doing these rituals and people see this, well, that's just, It's just a triangle, people use triangle. It's just everybody does the hidden eye, the eye of Horus, the eye, all-seeing eye, whatever. That's just an in kind of symbol right now. Oh, okay. But you tie all these points together, and, I would say that it looks to me like this Travis Scott guy was the vessel for this ritual, and whether it was, demonic possession per se, or he is just a victim of trauma-based mind control. I mean, really, at the end of the day, what's the difference?
I think it's both.
For the purposes of this conversation, I should say the difference is kind of immaterial. But yeah, do you really know? Either way, it's pointing to this was a planned a ritual.
Well,
and simple.
I mean, yeah, I think that's a really good point. These, the words that we, the terms that we throw around, like, yeah, these are just ways of talking about this stuff. So
and it's complete, and it's less. This is the thing, how blatant something like that is. Whereas one of the most damning symbol reveals on 9/11, if you ask me, other than maybe the Pentagon itself being, but one of the overlooked thing. Anyway, it was when they cut to George Bush at that school in Florida, reading to the first graders or whatever, and he was reading that book about a goat, and the book was notably upside down and backwards. Like, to me, that was just like, oh, that's a pretty blatant, like, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to subvert the natural and replace it with the goat, which is, this Baphomet Baal Moloch cult. Yeah,
and Capricorn, which is the devil.
Yeah, and all this adversarial energy, essentially, the adversary to nature. Yeah, okay, breaking the pentagram or breaking the Pentagon, okay, the two towers, okay, but like the goat thing was just,
I didn't know that.
Pretty sly.
Yeah, I didn't know that, or pretty bold, depending on how you look at it. I didn't know that he was reading. It was upside down and backwards.
Yeah, so he was supposedly reading, and it was like a first grade book, so it wasn't like a book. I mean, it had pictures and shit. Like, it was like a picture book, but he was holding it like he was reading it. But if he was reading it, the book was the wrong way around. So the cover is flipped. I mean, you can see the cover. It's like,
wow.
Like this.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I'm reading this book. But anyway,
that's pretty wild. I did not know that.
Yeah,
I was a wee lad.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that till after, years later. But
yeah,
it was still interesting to come across.
That's why to just fly around now, I feel like we've I don't know if we've exhausted the Travis Scott thing. I don't know where we are. I was gonna say, yeah, the Mormons. I heard somewhere that the Mormons were like there's like a hierarchy or something, and it's like the Sabbatean Frankists are like at the top because they're just like fucking crazy. Like, they're like the most crazy evil, and then you have like, I don't know, like the Jesuits or whatever, and then it goes down, and then like somewhere in the top middle are like the Mormons, and like the Mormons or the Masons are like more of like the ground level enforcers rather than the shot callers, and like a lot of what people think about the Masons, like the Masons are like the most like blue collar secret society, where like they kind of like, like they do the grunt work, if you will, So, I thought that was interesting,
and I think what do I know? This is pure speculation, but I think the real insider Mormons, you could probably fit in a normal sized hotel room comfortably.
Right.
I think you're talking 20 people, maybe not quite that comfortably, but 20, 25 people that are really in on, if that, But Mormonism's, I mean, as big a reach as they have, and they're always claiming, or is it Scientology's always claiming they're always the fastest growing religion on the planet. I think it's the Mormons. And so they got a lot of foot soldiers, like you're saying, but I think, the deep heart of the Mormon church is
I feel like
tiny.
the fastest growing religion on the planet is NASA. That's honestly, I'm trying to think. I'm like, what religion is growing? None of. And then I was like,
it's a weird qualifier, but yeah,
scientism, or the church of the religion of, to the extent that a religion makes a ridiculous claim and then people live their lives by that ridiculous claim. I would say the most popular religion right now in the United States is going to a really expensive college. That's a religion where it's like, well, if you do this thing that makes no sense, from
then
just
you'll have a better quality of life, regardless of the fact that there's no statistical proof for that claim whatsoever.
People
who go to college do not make more money than people who don't go to college. That is
right. You'll spend time that you could have spent learning a trade, working, saving up money, getting experience, becoming an adult, things I wish I did. And instead, you can go listen to some schmuck tell you about how you're white and you should commit suicide because the planet is dying. And then you internalize that and spend a decade smelling like piss at some fucking protest in Hyde Park or, Golden Gate Park. And then maybe if you're lucky, you'll snap out of it and be like, wait, this is just a psyop. And
ask a fundamental question. Okay, where's the evidence that all of this is based on? Which is that the Earth is dying. How do you support that claim? Show me.
Right. And I was talking to my, I think it was my roommate, and I was like, that's the hallmark of all this New Age, for the most part, except the manifestation stuff, which obviously that's has truth in it. So it's not all as clear cut as I'm making it out to be, but the whole the Extinction Rebellion stuff. It to me is very similar to the medieval feudalism, because it's very much you're fucking dirt and you're what's wrong with everything, and you just you should be happy with less than nothing, and then we'll take some stuff away, and the less you have, the happier you are. And so that's the eco terrorism thing, the Extinction Rebellion. It's very much
and you've got Saint Greta out there, flagellating people for being bad adults,
right. And but ultimately, what it glorifies is the Hunger Games reality, because it's that's the only way we can save the planet is by living in a fucking hovel or a shack with no food, maybe rainwater, and a couple of chestnuts that you have to fight over with the chipmunks. That's when they go to these climate councils in Geneva or Davos or whatever, that's that's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, is just people not having shit. You know what I mean? And again, those are the same conferences that all these people are flying private jets to, and then being you can't. You have the audacity to drive an SUV? We're going to tax you into the ground. We're going to carbon tax you and install a little thing in your vehicle, and we'll tax you at the pump. Meanwhile, at the level that they're living at, there's obviously, either there is no enforcement of that policy, or they're just so fabulously wealthy that it's they don't even notice. So I see that as very feudalistic, and I'm not the only person to have said that. I don't know what you think.
It's definitely a feudalistic mentality approach. It's fascism and neo-feudalism are pretty much the same thing. So, or at least fascism was kind of built to be a new take on, socially acceptable, culturally acceptable version of feudalism. And yeah, it's so, I mean, it's so prevalent, and it's just crazy how many of these admittedly government, private, public, private, whatever are suddenly the ones that everybody's either accountable to or getting their information from, or getting their certification on their lab coat from. And it's kind of this it's the papacy of the Church of Scientology, in a way, is all these billionaires and their ilk that are setting up these Rockefeller-esque charity type things, and not entrepreneur. What's the
Philanthropy.
Philanthropic endeavors that are just channeling money to do various misdeeds and move with it outside of the realm of real private business, but also outside of the realm of government, where they're just this kind of entity that just floats around and does things, and all of a sudden it's it's like the papacy. It's like the backbone of the cardinalship and bishopric type of system almost.
And they get to siphon off tons of tax dollars to do gain of function research.
Yeah, just like the feudal cardinal would be. How does a cardinal live a cardinal's life? Well, he collects all the taxes from all the churches in his cardinalship.
Right.
Cardinalship. I know bishopric.
Yeah.
Cardinalship.
Cardinaldom.
Cardinaldom. Yeah. There you go.
Cardinality. I don't know. Okay, Google. What's the demonym for cardinal?
Demonym cardinal.
Yeah. Words. They never cease to amaze me. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking, what term would like apply to, because I mean, I feel like every dualistic paradigm that we can talk about is outdated. Like they're all outdated. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I know what you mean.
Because it's especially now, like, I feel like globalism, everything is just getting sucked into this like Travis Scott portal to hell. It's like as quickly as you can try to talk about it, it's like, and you're just, oh, there goes that one. Wait, never mind. Hold on. I have to come up with a new language to talk about this. But anyway, in light of all that, nonetheless, I was going to say, while you were speaking, what came to mind for me is regulatory capture, right? But again, that's an outdated paradigm, because that's like, it makes sense to use that term when there would have been any regulatory agency that was not captured. But now it's like we are so far past there being anything even remotely uncorrupted or uninfiltrated in any arm of the government, which is in and of itself a corporation. Like,
and a really poorly functioning one at that.
Yeah, that's running out of money, and that's why they're bankrupting themselves, trying to
that has never made money, ever made money. It's a corporation that is all too happy to tell you that the goal is to not make money, or the goal is not to make. The goal isn't to make money anyway.
Oh, I see. Okay, so the United States is a nonprofit. That makes a lot of sense. They act like one of these nonprofits. They really do.
Yeah. I mean, it's between that and a trust that has no assets,
board of directors,
only liability and debt.
Right.
So that even if you get to this trust or this, secondary corporation, it doesn't have anything of value in it. I mean, there's no value at the end of that, because the value's all moved over here or in this company, not that company. But you can only do business with the second company. You can't anyway.
Right. Yeah. And then it's like, well, what do you actually own? And it's like, well, we have these financial instruments. See here, we've
Yeah,
bundled up securities and derivatives into bundles of Teletubbies, and then we just shuffle them around. And it's
And you
just
go,
like,
but what do you really have? Well, we have a bunch of people who are basically just debt markers for this whole
right.
system. That's really what we have. We have a bunch of people that we can insure and then draw
Right.
a
The
line of
bond
credit from
market.
their
Yeah.
insurance policy in order to fund everything that we do.
Right. And that's where, here we go. That's where the blockchain thing comes in, is that it allows, according to Alison McDowell, that's the direction this is all going with blockchain, because blockchain allows them to securitize their debt.
Right.
Well, yeah. Securitize. So essentially, yeah. So it's like, because, and I won't claim,
turn their debt into a fungible security.
right,
To
right. Yeah, I'll let you say that. I like get to a certain point with this stuff, with the finance stuff, and I'm like,
well, it's difficult because it's all shell game. It's all bait and switch.
yeah,
So, okay, we'll put this value here, and then we'll tie the value of that value against something else to the value of this third thing over here.
it reminds
And
me a
it's
lot of
all
like
high
coding.
wire.
It reminds me a lot of like
Yeah.
computer programming, where it's like, well, if this function,
Yeah.
then this variable, but then if A, then this can spit out that, but also if you do this, it's like, what the fuck is going on? But at least with computer programming, you can make something useful,
Right. Right.
you know, like a website. Whereas with this, it's like all you do is just create poverty.
Debt. Debt. Yeah. The whole system is just a debt machine. It just creates debt. That's all it does.
But then our debt is their wealth,
Right.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're at the top of the pile.
Yeah. Because they have more.
Well, they're also busy buying up all of the actual assets like homes and real estate and goods and food and means of production. Don't forget about that.
And inroads with the regulators, that was it. People have the authority to say, oh, you're allowed to buy this product, but you're not allowed to buy that product because it's made in Cuba and we don't like those dirty Cubans. Like, if you want to buy the product, you should be able to buy the product. Anyway.
Well, and now we can't buy anything from China, apparently, because have you heard about this? Apparently they're diverting these ships on purpose because the port in Florida is like open and always ready. But I've heard this from a friend of mine. There's like a company called, I don't remember, ABS or something, and they control the shipping lanes, and like they're not part of the government, but the government uses them a lot, as though they're sort of like the mercantile enforcers for a lot of this like oceanic traffic of goods. And so they essentially are routing all these ships to California on purpose, because this whole crisis with the supply chain is obviously engineered, and they want this to happen. And I'm sure, you can just throw something in about China in there, because it's always some kind of fucking deal with the trade war with China, because China's like, I think the US is finally kind of collecting on their greed karma with like, sending everything overseas, and it's like, oh, we can just, it's an extra tenth of a penny by sending this to Bangladesh and then to China and then to here. And it's like, now China's like, well, we make everything.
Yeah, what if we don't give any of that back to you?
That you put together. So like, you want masks, but you don't have the cotton, or like you don't have the rubber band, or you don't have the little clip. And it's like all those things pass through their hands, or are literally made there and often assembled there. And so they're like, well, what do you really fucking have other than a population with a lot of, painted paper?
Yeah. A lot of debt notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, that's and so I mean, there's that aspect of that's a religion too. The idea of the monetary system in its current incarnation is totally a religious cult. You know, everybody's
Oh
choosing
yeah.
to believe that this thing has value and this thing is going to continue to have value, and we should all keep all of our value in this type of paper. Which, you know, if that's what you find valuable, that's what you find valuable. You know, it's hard to argue with what people find valuable, but you know, when you start to realize that that thing that you're really holding on to is your indebtedness to a slavery system, not to put too fine a point on it, that's really what you've got is a certain amount of debt to a slavery system. And you often find that people who have more of those debt notes are in a lot deeper, a lot more deeply committed to being a part of that system and that system perpetrating and progressing because, you know, like Bill Hicks said, man, I got a lot of money tied up in this ride. My family's on this ride. My kids are on this ride. Don't tell me it's not real. It's got to be real. Look at all the things I've invested in this ride. Don't tell me it's not real.
That was right before he became Alex Jones.
That's right.
They were like, he's getting too close.
He's getting too close. Let's give him a throat condition.
Right.
Well, he talks like this.
Yeah. Let's give him $1 million in uncut Peruvian flake and see what he does with it. Yeah, I don't know if that shit's true. I just thought it was an interesting.
He saw too much at Waco, if anything.
He was at Waco?
Yeah, him and his friends drove when they heard it was going on. They were in Austin, or I think Austin, and they were like, well, fuck, let's drive over to Waco and check it out. So he and his three of his buddies just jumped in their truck and drove to Waco like as it was happening and stayed in the area for a couple of days.
That's wild.
I think there's footage of them. I think they got up to a certain point, and the ATF was like, "You cannot come any closer." And they're like, "Oh, we're just trying to drive over there." And they're like, "No." And then, like a year later, he was dead, or transforming into Alex Jones.
Right, he was in a chrysalis, cocooned.
He was in my changing people laboratory.
He was growing his
lab.
He was busy growing into his big boy body, Alex Jones jowls that he could violently shake in a cocaine-induced stupor.
Yeah. He had to cut his hair.
But yeah. So what's up with Waco? Did that go down the way that they say it did?
Oh, how do they say it did? You know, I should pull up that. I have a.
Well, like,
no,
I don't know, David Koresh having sex with a bunch of 14-year-old girls, and
maybe that may be true. The whole, as far as Waco going down, so I would say no to the idea that the people in Waco killed themselves. That is totally false. The ATF and FBI, mostly the ATF, I think. Maybe there's another DEA. DEA wasn't. I think it was ATF and FBI. Anyway, they basically just torched the place and said that they lit themselves on fire. I mean, they had flamethrower trucks there lighting the bill. I mean, there's video.
Why? Because they had so many guns.
Like, yeah, why did they? That's what was all. It was all supposed to be about gun control. You know, they didn't really get the PSYOP right until Oklahoma City. But that was in a series of PSYOPs that was trying to build into passage of the 94 Omnibus Crime Bill, which didn't pass in 94, was brought back up in 95, like 6 days after the Oklahoma City attack, and ran through the Senate like lard through a fat guy. I don't know, it's a terrible analogy, but it passed the Senate, you know, in no time after Oklahoma City. And the principal was Joe Biden as far as the authors and initial signatories to that bill.
Back when Joe Biden could read and write.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Back when he was probably one of the patron saints of the satanic hierarchy from that area in Delaware. Not Dover.
Yeah. I'm glad you know about that. Yeah, that's part of the Susquehanna thing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, and Jay Parker. I don't know if you know Jay, but Jay Parker grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, not Dover. Anyway, it wasn't. Wilmington, which is where the Bidens grew up, and Jay's older brother actually went to high school with Joe Biden. And Jay Parker was in and knew the Bidens to be in as well a satanic ritual abuse religion, which is a very, I guess, I don't know if it still is. As far as I know, it still is. Jay's probably in his mid 50s, maybe late 50s. And anyway, but so yeah, he grew up basically going through sexual trauma initiation and satanic religious rituals. And his family is still in it, as far as I know. He got out a long time, or 20, 30 years ago, something like that. But
What's his name?
Jay Parker.
Huh.
He's in the Philly area too. He knows Mark. He knows Mark. He's been on Mark's show a couple of times. Mark, I think he was on Jay Parker's show about maybe not even a year ago, like 6 months ago, maybe.
Let's see.
But yeah, Jay, yeah. So he talks quite a bit in his work about growing up in that culture, and that the Bidens were a very prominent family in that culture at the time, and probably still are. Again, it goes back to like with the Kardashians, it's generational. It's, I think Jay's got 4 or 5 brothers, and the ones that are still alive are still involved, as far as I know, in that satanic church. And I think he is one of the exceptions to the rule that, if you're born into it, it's a lifetime thing. I don't think a lot of people get out of it. And so, when you look at Joe Biden being the person that, he has been, and then you look at Hunter and it doesn't surprise me. Sure, he was sexually abused and traumatized growing up ritualistically. I'm sure of it.
Right.
And so to see him acting out in terms of drugs and lascivious sexual behavior, not a surprise at all. Or even if that was him actually acting out, or was that him in some sort of an alter state, or his actual persona somehow getting around the alter system of the trauma-based mind control. But Joe Biden's no different from Travis Scott, and to a degree at least. Hunter Biden certainly not.
Right.
These are people that, whatever the source, have had this mind control done on them, and are vessels for whomever it is that can control them. I mean, people haven't read Kathy O'Brien's The Transformation of America. It's not a very long book. 120 pages. You could probably find it free on the Internet Archive. Would be shocked if it wasn't free there. This is somebody who grew up as a trauma-based mind control sex slave and kind of unknowing intelligence agent, particularly during Clinton's time in Arkansas, and then for a while when they were in the White House. But the stuff goes on, and it's well outside the purview of a art podcast to be talking about it. But here we are, going down whatever sort of rabbit holes seem to spring up and jump to mind in front of us. But yeah, it's really interesting to think about the use of art and that, I think I wrote it down from last time. The idea, because I mentioned last time,
and music,
the modern artist as a programmable instrument, and you had also touched on art as a voodoo doll for the mass consciousness. These folks like Travis Scott, or was it Jay-Z and Beyonce, or what's the other guy? Anyway, Kanye West, or whomever it is. I shouldn't just be picking on the hip hop community, because certainly no different now with
Katy Perry.
Yeah, sure, with Katy Perry. I mean, Lady Gaga might be the most.
Yeah.
I mean, just consistently over the top.
Yeah.
Blatant, like, weirdness and occultism.
It's definitely
not just hip hop. It's infiltrated. I mean, to go back to Katie O'Brien, she talks a lot in her books and her work about how much was going on with the Nashville country music scene in the 70s and 80s and how
really
fucking crazy that was. Yeah, because where'd the Clintons get all their success? They were in charge of Arkansas, essentially, when the CIA needed a place to fly cocaine into to supply Nashville and the country music scene. So Arkansas was that place.
Shit. I didn't
So that's
know that.
all that shit. All the Clintons got all their power from overseeing or collaborating in this illicit thing to bring cocaine into Arkansas to distribute into Tennessee. And so, she, met these folks who are involved in, a lot of the, I don't know particular country music artists' names. I don't want to say somebody that she didn't say. So I'm just, country music artist X, had this sexual altar for a few years, and then she was just gone and probably shuffled to some other part of the country or whatever. And then this new girl was always around him or whoever, But the whole system of the Nashville country music scene was big, as of course Hollywood and Washington as well. But I think other places too. I think there's a lot with New York. I think anyway, it's prevalent, but. Just the whole idea of using those, a vessel, a programmable tool, a voodoo doll like a Lady Gaga in order to, control that person and make them the vessel for this particular ritual or these particular sets of rituals. I think at the end of the day, to make another historical connection, I don't think Hitler was really the brains of the operation. I think he was the vessel through which all of it happened. He was the, and I mean vessel, not just in the sense of like political centerpiece of the party, but like literally the vessel, the way that Travis Scott was made the vessel for this ceremony, or others might be made, but like he was the incarnation of this plan going into action. It wasn't his plan, but he had been put in a frame of mind or state of being where he was to go through with this plan. And I think that's a pretty regular pattern, a pretty, you can pick up on that pattern and see it happening again and again and again. And I thought we were going to go into this. We're spent plenty of time here, but and didn't even get into, so this might save for a future episode. But I thought I would have brought up by this point the Laurel Valley,
Laurel Canyon.
Laurel Canyon. Thank you. I knew it was the whole Laurel Canyon thing, and that whole, the hippie music scene as a psyop.
That's a really good one. Yeah, maybe let's do that next time.
Yeah, that could be a whole. Because there's some great books and documentaries and stuff on that.
Ooh, yeah, I like that. I love that idea, and we can prepare. And I can,
yeah. Because I need to brush up. I haven't really reviewed that stuff in a little bit.
That is like the ultimate. That bursts a lot of people's bubble, because they love that music.
Yeah, yeah.
We all, I don't know. Yeah.
My favorite. I don't know that they were necessarily involved in it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't. But my favorite band of all time is Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And if Neil Young's there, okay, fine. If he's not a big deal. And they were just on the end of that. So but at the same time, it's kind of like, yeah, they were probably involved. I should just be like, let that be okay that might be a reality. But yeah, who doesn't like the Doors music, man? It's good.
Right. Yeah. Well, just briefly, I wanted to say, if people are not familiar with this stuff that we're like the MK Ultra stuff and the mind control, because we assume that everyone has heard of that, but not everyone has, or maybe at least not everyone that would listen to a podcast about art, quote unquote. Has, although I think by this point, guys, it should be clear that that's that's the Trojan horse, it's an art podcast. It is. It's not that, but it's also
Yeah. Since it's all connected, we might as well take advantage of
Right.
being able to connect this one interesting aspect to all these other things.
Yeah, I was going to recommend if anyone. I mean, this is a fantastic podcast in general.
Well, thank you. I think we're doing great.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
The higher side chats with Greg Carlwood. If you want to get a really good bringing up to speed of this stuff with subpersonalities and entity attachment, and which again are all just ways of talking about things, but really mainly like the trauma based stuff and the subpersonalities and the alters. The June 5th 2021 episode with Dr. Tom Zinser. It's called Subpersonalities, Entity Attachment, and Jared. That is a really, really good episode.
Give me that date again.
June 5th.
Thank you.
It's phenomenal. And yeah, that guy Tom Zinser has the most adorable old man voice. Like you just love listening to it. It's again like very ASMR. But yeah, he really goes through. It really illuminated a lot of stuff for me. Just listening to it, I got chills actually numerous times through that episode, just as he was describing the mechanics of what happens during trauma and how like there are parts, the way that the body acts to protect itself during times of danger or trauma. The mind has its own sort of mirror mechanisms to that, but they're not necessarily visible, and we only become aware of them later after the consequences of those defense mechanisms start to become apparent. And usually those consequences, according to this description, come in the form of these sort of stubborn subpersonalities that are created in order to be able to survive trauma, particularly if you're talking about children and sexual trauma, because children they have no way of integrating any of that stuff. And so if you expose children to stuff like that really young, then it's almost a guarantee that something in their psyche will sort of like snap open, and their psyche creates a version of them, or an identity or a personality, subpersonality, whatever you want to call it, that is able to deal with that experience, which is too much for the main personality. And so, and the way that I, as I was listening to this, the way that hit me is I was like, whoa, isn't that crazy? Because, when you hear about, so much of the time people recount these stories of like abuse or sexual abuse or whatever, and that's really where like their whole spiral begins. But often they say things like, oh, well, such and such happened, but I liked it. Or that's when I realized I was bad and I deserve to be blah, blah, blah. And it's like, to me, that's that subpersonality forming, because there needs to be a narrative built around it that's not, because it's like that, the effect of that shock on the main personality dissociates, because it's like, whoa, I don't know what this is. I'm not ready for that. I can't engage with this. Like I'm not able to interact. I'm not able to transact with this experience. And so that raw material of consciousness is then almost hastily molded into a new form, or like a little avatar that's like, okay, you go, like you deal with this situation. The avatar's like, oh, all right, what are we doing? Oh shit, sexual trauma. All right, yeah, I'm going to be a super sexualized young person now. That's the type of person that could deal with this. Someone that's like, oh yeah, hypersexuality, sexual trauma, that's commonplace to me. Those are waters I swim in all the time. Bring it on. Oh yeah, let's do another. And then that is how, and so what this, now I'm like summarizing this podcast, but it was really interesting and it's really relevant to this. He basically was saying that like the only way to deal with trauma is, what he was saying essentially is that these subpersonalities, they don't go away. They may recede into the background, but they don't go away, because they they live forever in that moment. Like they were forged in the fire of the emotional extremes of that moment, and they essentially live in like this weird paranoid limbo of like bitterness and negative emotion in a way.
Because if they ever come into contact with another experience like that,
Exactly.
that's where the personality can go in order to deal with it.
They see their role as protectors, and so in their eyes they can't go away, because if they do, then the full shock and intensity of just such a similar negative experience will once again have to fall upon the main personality, which is what the goal of creating that subpersonality was to begin with, is to avoid that. No, and anyway, to put a period at the end of this, he was saying that the only way to get them to quote unquote go away is literally to like bring them to the discussion table and be like offer them a chance to tell their story. This was so fascinating how like the one thing they can't resist is if you call them out in that very specific way where you say, I understand what happened to you and it was horrible. You like commiserate with them and you echo, you mirror their emotions and you say, yeah, it was terrible what happened to you. That should never happen to anyone. It was so cruel. And it was so, egregious, a miscarriage of whatever, and then you kind of bait them in with that, and especially if you have the subject in a trance, and then almost without fail, they'll be like, yeah, it was so messed, they're so like, they're so desperate to be heard and understood. And that they want that justice experience, because that's why they've been forced to stay alive, if you will, in suspended animation for so long, is because there was never any justice.
And the psyche wants that resolution,
Exactly.
Overall,
the closure.
Yeah, and wants to be able to express that and in a way that makes the individual understand that you can put it in a box and you can spend all of your energy trying to hold back the outrage or outpouring of emotion that you feel. That's what that altar is doing. It's holding all of that stuff back, and you're using your energy. People are constantly who are in, fall into that from their past or whatever, constantly expending energy to keep those emotions at bay. And it's something I know from my personal life, people I've known very, very, very well that have had, abuse in childhood, that are constantly essentially walking around trying to appear like everything is fine. And it's just emotionally holding back the outrage. And
it's like
once that gets a chance to come out, people realize I don't have to hold this in a box because other people have had this experience too, and that's not something I have to be ashamed of, or it's not something I have to have an emotional attachment to, because it's not just me. Someone else can understand this. And so, yes, you're
right.
Right.
I agree with you. It's an enormous amount of energy to try to suppress all of that. And I think that's why people, I think that's one of the reasons that so many of the illnesses that are common now, is because you have all of these people walking around. And also, I think mainstream Christianity kind of reinforces that culture where it's like, let's just think about the good things and like everything's fine. It's a wonderful day. We're so lucky that God is.
And even if it's terrible, in a couple days or months or years, you'll be dead and you'll be in the actual good place.
Right. Well, and I just want to emphasize, I don't want to bash that gratitude or anything. It's just like you can have both. You can have your cake and eat it too. And remember that time that someone poisoned your cake and tried to kill you. You know what I mean? Because I feel like you need all of those elements. And and again, and I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but it's sort of a mockery of gratitude to just have like this Pollyanna version of positivity and gratitude. It really is, because it's like gratitude, just like, just like, I don't want to say self-righteousness, but just like there's a place for anger of like, oh, you're trying to take my children away from me and inject them with poison. Like, I'm angry, and for good reason, because they are my children and you are trying to do things to them and violate their bodily sovereignty. Like, that is an appropriate place and time for anger. At that moment, anger is your spiritual inheritance. In the same way, whereas like, oh, you took my seat on the bus, like that's maybe not a place to like get so angry that you get violent or whatever, get to that level. In just the same way with gratitude, it's like there's an appropriate place. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, if you're like a farmer or you have a harvest or, like food, like that's something to be grateful for, right? There are good things that it makes sense to be grateful for, because again, you're turning your attention to have awareness of your needs and what you need to exist and subsist and thrive in the world. And that's an important thing. It's good. Anger is like I don't want that. I don't need that. And that's very clear to me. My emotions are showing me that. It's automatic. It's reflexive. Whereas gratitude is a little bit more conscious, but by the same token, it's like, oh, I do want that. I do need that. And I'm getting that. Great. So I just want to throw that in there. I think it's a real mockery of gratitude to just sort of be like, like, oh, I'm grateful for all these terrible things that happen. It's like, I mean, unless you have like a really good story don't get me wrong. I have said, and I maintain this, I am grateful for a lot of the quote unquote, well, no, they were bad. A lot of the difficult experiences that I've had in my life, but I know very specifically why I'm grateful to those things. I'm not just like a glutton for punishment where it's like, oh, even this was good. It's like, no, this was good because it allowed me to see that we live in a world of like just abject moral bankruptcy where everyone just chooses their addiction. And that has given me some insight into this whole situation that we're going through now. And I'm like,
you're not grateful that you touched the stove, but you're glad that you know now not to do it again. I mean, that's essentially it. I'm grateful I burned myself, or it sucks that somebody else burned themselves, or whatever. But now I know what not to do.
The best way to put it would be, I'm grateful to not be one of the people whose ego was going into the times that we're in now in this position of, well, I know what I'm doing. I've never made any big mistakes. I feel like I can just do what everyone else is doing and I'll be fine. Yeah. Because that wasn't me. Because I was like, no, I have made mistakes and I've gone along with what other people were doing. And it was terrible. It was awful.
Yeah.
And that can go badly. That can go wrong. And I just emphasize that because, that's so much of what's going on now with all the mandates and everything, just people, they're not stupid. People do have a lot of reservations and they do hesitate and they are like, oh, this is really shady. People aren't stupid. But then ultimately they're like, well, everyone's doing it, everyone's requiring it. So, whatever, and that's, I think that ultimately is one of the biggest goals of this agenda, is just to get us to be like, all signs point to there's some shady business going on. And even my own intuition, my gut, my body is saying this is not right. But for convenience's sake, I'm just going to ignore that.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the old saying, a person is smart. A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, mob creatures. People are not smart. A person is smart, but people are not. But I just like, to bring that up to emphasize that, I think it's a good saying. The other thing, before we get too far away from the mind control and altered personalities, not that I ever thought when we started this that I would be suggesting this to do as a movie review, but have you seen the movie Glass from a couple years ago with James McAvoy and Bruce Willis and Sam Jackson, and it was an M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong movie.
I don't think I have, no.
Okay. Well,
Shamalama Ding Dong.
it might be an interesting one to do because I think James McAvoy's got like 20 personalities or something.
In the movie or in real life?
Yeah, in the movie.
Interesting.
His character has all these personalities. I don't know. It's just made me think of it. It was a pretty good movie.
Have you seen
it? I saw it once, but
have you seen the Avengers movie?
I think I saw The Avengers. That's the only. I saw one of the movies in the franchise, and I think it was the first one.
I feel like that would be a really good movie for us to review.
Okay, I do that one. I haven't seen it. I haven't
seen it either.
Years.
This is, and I feel like
if I saw it
on principle, I didn't watch it, even though I kind of wanted to. But it's like, for me, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's Pluto and Scorpio or what, but I'm just like, if it's the talk of the town, and that's why I even hesitated to do the Travis Scott thing, but I couldn't resist. And it's like so fresh.
Yeah.
We'll lure people in with that, and then they get into the brunt of the podcast and they're like, these people are insane. They're barely talking about Travis Scott or talking about the Borgia, Christian art of the fucking Middle Ages or whatever. But I was going to say,
get your own podcast to talk about something else if you want to.
Right. No, that's not how podcasts work, ladies and gentlemen.
We talk about whatever we want to talk about, and you give us glowing comments and likes.
That's how it works. But yeah, so so just something like the Avengers, which is like, everyone's talking about it and they're like, oh, have you seen this? So in that way, I'm always like, no, I don't want to fucking watch that. But for my podcast, listen, for science, for research,